with Sean Goldhawk from Yamaha to talk about the all-new 2010 YZ250F. Now, Sean, there's a whole heap of changes to the bike. Firstly, visibly noticeable is a totally new frame, but how about we just start with the engine? What can you tell us that's, basically new with the engine?
Okay, new with the engine. Well, I should start actually with the frame, because the concept from the Yamaha design team is very much chassis first. So they developed an all-new chassis and then an engine to mate the frame. So the chassis has been made for the best handling, very agile in the corners and stable on the straight. So we've gone the bilateral beam frame, as you can see here. It's now a twin spar top tube. Previously it was a single spar, and that's allowed the designers to get the fuel tank a lot lower and the weight further back and much more central to the line of the bike. So it's all about mass centralisation. Previously the fuel tank was either side of the main frame, so that's a very big change for the 2010 model.
Okay, now the engine, the 250cc four-stroke single has been pretty much a class leader in this class. It's the 250cc motocross class, really. Now, extra horsepower, whole lot of new internals. What can you tell me about the engine?
Well, I can start with the fact that it's a lot snappier off the throttle. It's got a quicker acceleration and more low to mid range. And how that's been achieved is we've retained the 5-valve layout, by the way, and the carburetor fed system. But how that's been achieved, there's been changes to the exhaust port here. It's been reshaped, and we've got a higher inlet cam. We've got a lot of changes inside the carby. Accelerator pump has been modified. We've got a much flatter, straighter inlet tract here from the air filter. And all those changes have been designed for better low to mid-range power delivery. So there's a lot more snap, and they mate with the chassis. So the chassis gets you into a corner quicker, and the engine changes are going to get you out of a corner quicker.
Okay, now the bodywork looks pretty much revamped totally, and especially with the tank that sits inside the frame rails. Obviously the seat looks flatter. You can get forward, the rider can get forward easier. Now, what about the suspension? Is it the same as the 2009 model, or is it changed as well?
It's actually very similar to 2009, the Kayaba units, front and back. They have been modified though. The rear suspension in particular is a very similar unit, but it sits much lower. So the frame itself is more compact. It sits 12mm lower at the head tube, 7mm further back, so it's actually a smaller main frame. And that's allowed the designers to get the shock absorber much lower for lower weight. So there are some fork internal changes as well. The rod has new surface coating treatment, and it's got new fork seals as well.
I've noticed that the radiators are mounted differently too. There's a new mounting system there. Are they greater in capacity?
They're actually the same capacity radiator, but they do sit lower and further back, again for mass centralisation, and they now have gone to a 3 mounting point system for extra strength.
Okay, now what about the protection down the bottom and the oil capacity? Now, we know it's a dry sump engine. The oil sump or the dry sump setup has slightly smaller capacity than last year, doesn't it? And there's some changes when regarding to the bash plates. What's the story there?
Okay, yeah, the oil tank is very fractionally smaller, I think a 0.1 of a litre smaller. It sits in the same location, but is physically a lot smaller, and there's a different drain hole on it as well. That's now protected with a polypropylene bash plate that's all-encompassing. Previously it was a 2-piece aluminium and plastic affair. Now it's a 1-piece and offers greater protection and is lighter in weight.
Now, Sean, there's some changes inside the crankcases with the gearbox and the clutch. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, yes, there are some changes. The clutch capacity has been increased, so it's a lot stronger. It's got stiffer springs, but it's got a lighter feel at the lever, and that's been achieved with a revised actuating arm lever ratio. There's also, in the gearbox, a lot of changes. We've got a stronger internals, and third and fourth gear have been revised for a better shift actuation and taller gearing.
Now, we've spoken to Sean Goldhawk from Yamaha regarding all the changes to the new 2010 YZ250F, but Cycle Talk's Matt Brown has been on the bike around Cessnock motocross track, giving it the berries. So, Matt, is it as good as they say, mate?
Yeah, it is, Chris. It's a very impressive machine. They've done very well. They've refined it pretty much from a blank piece of paper. Totally different to the A9 machine, and I guess the first impression that's different is the actual size of the machine. It just feels like a smaller, compact machine. Yamaha have gone for a more low profile. They call it a dart look, and yeah, I think they've achieved that. It's very easy to ride around the track, to throw around the track, and I guess we'll talk more about the engine in a moment.
Well, it certainly does look lower when you watch the guys ride out from the dummy grid. It looks a lot smaller than last year's model, so it does have that feeling then.
It certainly does. They've gone for a lower centre of gravity. A lot of the parts internally and externally have been lowered, although the bars and the pegs have remained the same height, which as far as someone going from an 09 to a 2010 model, the geometry is actually the same, but the centre of gravity is actually lower, which means you can actually get around the track and around the corners apparently in a faster amount of time.
Okay, well, tell us about the engine. There's been a number of changes, aimed more at bottom and mid-range power. Has that worked out in reality on the track?
Yeah, you can feel the difference, Chris. I know that Yamaha have gone for lighter components to help with the revving of the engine, and you can certainly get that impression coming out of corners. The engine gets up to optimum RPMs pretty quick, and certainly as you sit in that great rev range wherever you need around the track.
Now, there's been a few changes to the suspension, only minor changes, like as we know that the shock's position lower for a start, but the changes that are there, do they feel any better than the 2009 model?
There are small changes. You wouldn't say it's majorly noticeable. We had a couple of goes fiddling around with the clickers on it, getting it to what I like. I guess it's down to rideability and rider comfort. But the changes are slightly noticeable. But still, I think with suspension, it's like any motocross bike. If you spend a bit of time and invest a bit of effort into tuning it to your particular riding style, you're going to get the gains out of it.
Just back to the engine for a second. The 254 strokes, not what you'd call peaky, but they do require a bit of aggressiveness to get them out of the corners. Don't jump out like a big 450. But do you think that as the 250 engines have got more and more updated along the way, and especially with this one with a more low down and bottom end grunt, that it punches out of corners easier and it's easier to ride in through the corners and exiting the corner?
This bike especially, I know one of the Yamaha's optimum ideals for this particular bike was to get it cornering easier. And I guess that's one of the reasons why they tried to get the engine lighter components and get it revving easier, so you can get that punch out of the corners. The geometry and the engine together is just working for this particular bike, and you can notice it definitely out of the track, coming out of the corners, and especially through tight areas of the track. It works really well.
With the different twin spar frame compared to last year's model, and the tank sitting essentially in between the frame rails instead of on either side or over the top on either side, that's allowed Yamaha's engineers to get a flatter seat. Has that worked for you?
Yeah, definitely, Chris. I mean, if you can just even look at the bike, how flat the seat is, the fuel going down inside the tank is just helping the lower centre of gravity, that in combination with everything else they've done. And you can definitely feel it sitting on the bike and moving around the cockpit, moving forwards, back, coming into the corners, out of the corners. It's a very flat bike, although it's not uncomfortable by any means. But yeah, you can definitely feel the changes. And I guess the advantage of the tank sitting down into the frame, people that do some maintenance on their bike and love to take their tank off and wash everything, they're going to really be able to get down inside their engine and give it the love they need.
Okay, well we've had a technical rundown of the bike, we've had a riding impression. Look out for the full test in an upcoming issue of Cycle Talk magazine.